to the Marina Skua Podcast. My name's Marina. I'm a knitwear designer and yarn dyer based in the southwest of England. And in this podcast, I mostly talk about knitting, but also about some other seasonal crafts. I really like using local materials and focusing on the sustainability and occasionally frugal aspects of crafts. That being said, I'm a knitwear designer, so I do knit quite a lot more than I suspect a lot of other people would. So I'm just going to jump straight in because I've got quite a few things to show you today. In this episode, I'm going to be showing you quite a few knitting projects and also one that I'm going to be modifying with a little bit of sewing. And this will be also the first garden check of the year. If you've not watched previously, I am also a keen gardener and I do a little bit of growing of dye plants for natural dyeing, which I do a lot less than synthetic dyeing, but it's a thing that I really enjoy as well. So I'll be showing you some of the spring things we've got flowering in the garden later. So first up is the jumper that I'm wearing. I have shown this on the podcast before, and I said that I would show it on and talk a little bit more about it once the pattern was available. The pattern has now been released. This is the Whaled Yoke. So it's based on a hat pattern I designed probably about 2 years ago now. So it has these little sort of, I can't tell whether they're trees or little fronds of plants like ferns or something. I definitely wanted to go for a botanical feel, and I've realised that that is one of the emerging themes in my knitwear design. A lot of things inspired by nature, lots of leaves and vines and branches and things like that. So yes, it's called whaled, which is the Old English word for a weed. And so on the yoke you've got these bigger motifs, and then on the cuffs we've got little branches. They're symmetrical, so they go in the opposite direction on each sleeve. And then on the hem, we've just got tiny little sproutlets. And I think they're really cute. As is becoming a little bit of, I think, a personal signature thing with some of my designs. We've got contrast ribbing for the neckline and the cuffs and the hem. I hadn't realised until a friend of mine pointed out that I tend to do that a lot. And it was when I took a photo of all of the things I had knitted last year, and there were quite a few of my designs that had that going on. And I don't know, it's something I really enjoy. A few people have been omitting them when they've been knitting patterns, and that's also fine too. You're welcome to modify things however you want. I think that's one of the fun things about making your own clothes. So you can change things as you want to make it something that you're really, really going to enjoy wearing. So yes, the pattern is out now. It is on my website and on Ravelry. The yarn I've used is my own Mendip DK yarn, which is locally sourced from a farm just on the Mendip Hills, which is a few miles away from where I live. And the grey is the natural undyed colour, so it's a blend of white lamb's wool with some very dark brownish black lamb's wool to give a lovely heathery grey. And then the contrast colour is one called Beach, named after the Copper Beach. And I think that's all on that one. And the next thing I'm going to show you is underneath. I am actually glad to be taking it off because it's really quite warm here. Spring has arrived and I am excited about it. So this also means that I'll be able to show you some of the other details of the jumper. So you can just see we've got that. We've got a nice folded neckband there. Again, quite a few people, including some of my test knitters, have left the neckband unfolded, so it's more of like a bit of a turtleneck almost, which looks really, really pretty. And then just got some short rows at the back neck, so you can see the motifs dip down a little bit lower there. And yeah, it's a super comfy thing to wear. and I think I'll probably get a few more weeks wear out of it during the day, but in the evenings it still gets quite chilly in the UK throughout the evening, so I'll probably continue wearing it quite a bit. And yeah, that brings us on to the next thing, which is this one. I don't think I showed this one in the last episode, but I was still working on it. This is the Ironwork Tea by my lovely friend Diana Waller, who designs under the name Paper Tiger Knits. And this is hand spun yarn that I spun specifically for this project. A lot of my spinning I will do just because I like spinning and I have some fibre that I want to use and I want to create a type of yarn, and then afterwards I will decide what I'm going to do with it. It's something I do less with yarn that I buy. I haven't bought yarn for a very long time. I've had a few things come in for designs, but I've also been working a lot from stash. But with fibre and spinning, I have quite a few fleeces that I've bought from various shows and from people that I know. This is a whole mishmash of fibres. There's Angora, there's alpaca, there's some mohair. There are bits from various fleeces from farms that I've visited. It's all fibre that I've either dyed by hand or left its natural colour. So there's quite a bit of just plain white fibre in here, and also some naturally grey and beige, which I've then mixed with quite brightly coloured fibre. But when mixed in with so many neutrals and blended and spun together, it gives a really subtle effect. And I'm just so pleased with how it's turned out. I spun up the green yarn first, very slight grey green, and I know that in a lot of types of lighting it just looks plain grey, but it is a lovely, gentle, soft, sagey green, which is one of my very favourite colours. And then I blended the contrast colour, keeping that in mind, and blending it and just adding in a little bit more dark brown fleece until I got to the stage where the pattern would just show up enough to be nice as colour work. Sometimes I like really bold contrast for colour work, but for a lot of things I like a very subtle contrast, and I think this has turned out perfectly. The colours at the time when I was spinning the yarn and doing most of the knitting felt really wintry. They felt a lot like the frost on the grass and the branches and the leaves out in the fields when I went on morning walks. But I think they work perfectly with a springy outfit as well. It's an interesting one because it's actually a very warm blend. I mean, we've got mohair, alpaca, angora, all of which are very warm fibres, and it gives this amazing fuzzy halo, and it's super soft. I was slightly worried about the prickle from the mohair because it's not kid mohair, it's just grown up goat. That can be slightly coarse, which I've used previously to reinforce sock yarn that I've spun. But no, it's turned out wonderfully soft. And it's interesting because it's a very warm garment, but at the same time it's short-sleeved and really quite cropped. Probably more cropped than anything else I own, other than an old top where the hem went all rubbish. Just like a cotton one, and I chopped off the bottom, and I tend to wear that under dungarees. But I'm really liking it. It goes so nicely with some of the high-waisted things that I have. It's a really enjoyable thing to wear, and surprisingly doesn't cause me to overheat around the middle because it's still quite breathable. The wonders of natural fibres. And so yes, Ironwork Tea by Diana Waller. Highly recommend it. Lovely pattern. Incidentally, I followed the French instructions because these days when I'm knitting from other people's patterns, which I don't do much at all at the moment, I I would like to learn something from them. And with this, it's lovely, but it's a fairly straightforward construction that I'm already quite familiar with, and so I decided it would be a chance to brush up on my knitting French, which I definitely wouldn't have been able to cope with for something less familiar or more complex. And that was interesting, but I really enjoyed it, and so yeah. Next up is a second pattern that I've released since the last episode. This was sort of quite a quick one because this time of year where we live is really quite hilly, and so we've been going out on walks a lot more frequently. The weather tends to be really unpredictable, and even when it's gloriously sunny outside, it can be really, really windy. And being the delicate flower that I am, I get really chilly ears, and when I have cold ears, I'm miserable. So I needed a hat that would keep my ears really warm. A lot of the hats I've designed so far have been a fixed length brim. So I've done folded brims before that are stitched to the inside of the hat. So it's a double brim, but it's a fixed length. And I wanted one where, if necessary, I could just pull the whole brim down and completely cover my ears. And I wanted something really warm. And so I made this one. It is knitted using Rain Cloud and Sage yarn, which Rain Cloud and Sage is run by my lovely friend Ruth in Germany. This is her homestead yarn, which is very sadly discontinued, but I did have a skein of it and I wanted to do something nice with it. This actually only used half a skein, so I will be able to get another hat or headband or something out of the rest of it. And so it's got a nice long brim that can be folded as I choose for maximal ear warmth. And so for various reasons I've called this hat Earist. Spelled like earnest but without the N. And that's partially because I really want to keep my ears warm. And also the little cable patterns that I've done on here kind of look like ears of wheat. And also it sort of sounds like Dearest, which I think is just really cute. I've never claimed to be sensible about my pattern names. So I'm going to put it on my head and almost certainly make my hair ridiculous for the rest of the podcast, just so you can see how it fits. It's really super cozy. I can move it around to accommodate whatever's going on with my hair, because it's getting really long now. And it's really nice and toasty, and it fits very nicely on my head. I'm really pleased with the decreases. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see those there because I can't see the camera. But I can show you those there. And yeah, I think it's just a nice little pattern. So again, this one is on Ravelry and on my website. You can get it from there and have some nice warm ears. And yeah. Now, which one am I going to show you next? Yeah, I'm going to show you my cardigan because I'm really excited about this one. So this is one that I showed in a rather interesting form in the previous episode. I think it was the previous episode. This is a cardigan that involves quite a lot of steeking. Steeking, if you don't know, is working something in the round and then slicing down the middle so that you can make a cardigan but knitted in the round effectively. You can do it for other things as well, but that's one of the main ways you'll see it used. Really useful for colour work, because working colour work back and forth, stranded colour work, I find completely disgusting and I just absolutely will not do it. My purl tension is appalling. I think I've mentioned this before. And I am quite stubborn about the things that I will and won't do with knitting. I will often come up with some strange workarounds to make sure that I'm going to enjoy the knitting as much as possible, and this is a prime example of that. So this is the Galdor Cardigan. It's a really fun design. I really enjoyed knitting it, and I was expecting it to be quite limited in how I could wear it, because it's peculiar. It's an open cardigan. It doesn't have much positive ease on the body, and it's got these really big sleeves. And they're not full length. On me, they just come to just below the elbow. I'm going to chuck it on so you can have a look. So you can see they're strange length sleeves, and they're just really wide, and I thought that wasn't actually going to be very warm, but it has been completely perfect for the really unpredictable weather we've been having, and is surprisingly warm. It's brilliant. And so I've really enjoyed wearing this. It's in test knitting now, and so the pattern's going to be coming at some point in June, probably early to mid-June. And yeah, I mentioned that I've been doing a lot of leafy viney stuff, and this is a prime example. I'll take it off again so I can show you better, because the colour work on here is distracting. Let's show you that side. So they're going upwards like they're meant to. So we've got this combination of a leafy viney thing with, on the sleeves, there's this more geometric motif around the edges, and all of the colour work on the inside is completely faced with a slightly contrasting yarn. And so, because it's an open cardigan, I didn't want it to flap open and then you see all of the floats and stuff on the inside. I think that's ugly and I didn't want it. So this also covers up the steeked edges. So the steeks are down the middle, down the armholes, and then this front band is knitted in the round, joined at the bottom, and then you steek that bottom bit. I told you it was a slightly weird construction. It's got this really cute bit at the back neck, just to make it nice and symmetrical. Again, lots of symmetry to make sure that all the vines are going in the right direction. So they go upwards on both sides of the front. Come on, wrangle properly. There we go. So they grow upwards, and on the arms, on the sleeves, at the front, they both grow outwards. So when you wear it, they are mirrored. I like symmetry, I really do. And so that one is in test knitting at the moment, and I am very excited to bring it out into the world. It's, as I said, a peculiar one, but has been surprisingly wearable for me and meant stepping out of my comfort zone a little bit as a designer, which I have really, really enjoyed, especially as in the photos I shared of it so far and with the test knitters joining and things, the response has been really positive, which is just very encouraging, as I still feel like quite a new knitwear designer. And yeah, so it's super nice, and I can't wait to have this out in the world for all of you. Oh, yarn! Haven't mentioned the yarn. It's Woolly Mammoth Fibres. These are 3 limited edition colours. So Emma has been doing quite a lot of limited editions from various flocks near her in Ireland. So the body of the cardigan is this really cool grey, sort of a nice mid-grey, and this is a blue texel and cheviot blend. The background of the colourwork, so the creamy white, is a Pole Dorset, and then the contrast colour in the colour work and in the facings is a Jacob's yarn, which is, for this sample, not that high contrast. You can sort of see it's slightly darker than the main body, and it just means that you get more of a crisp definition on the colour work. And when picking colour combinations, if people are going to knit it, you can choose a lot higher contrast or similar contrast, or just not bother with the third colour and just do the main body and the secondary contrast colour as the same colour. Emma's yarn is beautiful. I really love it. I love what she's doing with smaller farms, and making sure that wool that is not being appreciated is used and turned into something beautiful. And this isn't a yarn that you would consider soft. It's definitely rustic, but it is pleasant. Like, I would not have thought of Texel and Cheviot as something I necessarily would have wanted against my skin, but it's lovely. It's really nice, and it has a lovely feel to it. You've got a combination of the drape of the body of it, and then these quite sort of structured elements from where you've got lots of layers for the colour work. And so, yes, just excited about everything that Emma's doing. And it's really nice to have a design in multiple undyed shades for this example. Yeah. Now, just a couple more projects to show you. The next one I am keeping in this lovely project bag, which is part of a collaboration I did with my friend Harriet of Wildwood Stitches in November last year. These ones are the Gather bags. This is my own personal one because I kept one, and it's been so lovely to work with Harriet. We did another collaboration last week, and in more sort of cool tones this time. I don't have one of the full-size bags to show you because they all sold out really very quickly, which I'm so grateful for. I'm still not at all used to things doing really well when they launch, and it's very, very exciting to see that people are excited about the work that I and people I'm working with are doing. Harriet did make me this teeny tiny little pouch using the same fabrics, and it's lovely and pretty and great for organising all of the stuff that usually just lives on my coffee table. But I'm almost certain it won't be the last time I work with Harriet. Her bags are astounding. They're a ridiculously good quality. She uses Harris tweed for the base and really nice quality printed cotton for the top part. And it's all natural fibre other than the zip, which is sort of inevitably is a plastic one. Is that true? Yeah. And she uses cotton soy batting, I think, for the interfacing, which I just think is so great. And she has just launched her own website. So if you like really good quality, pretty project bags, I do suggest that you go and check it out. I'll put a link in the description box below because the work she's doing is astounding. Yeah, so in here I have a perfectly coordinating pair of socks. This yarn is one that I've been wanting to work with for ages. Again, it's one by a friend of mine. This is yarn by Annabelle Williams. She's Annabelle Textiles on Instagram. She sources some of her yarn, some of her wool from the same farm as me. And this one is her Pure Romney sock. Pure Sock Romney? I can never remember which way round the words go. But she's a natural dyer. This one's dyed with goldenrod and it's called the Green Green Grass, which I think is completely perfect. And I've really been enjoying working with it. I'm just coming up with a little sock design here. Just some fun sort of faux cables It has been so long since I've made socks. I made a really chunky pair for my husband for his birthday, which was back at the beginning of the year. Other than that, I don't think I've worked on socks for over a year, so it's really nice to be working on a nice fine pair again. And in a really nice yarn. And so if you are one of the people who is on the hunt for non-superwash, no nylon sock yarn, Annabelle's is really one that I would recommend. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how these go. They've got to the stage where I inevitably stop on socks, because it's like at some point I'm going to have to start doing increases for the gusset, and I haven't quite worked out when that's going to be, and I need to do measuring and then actual thinking and stuff, so it hasn't happened yet. But they will be coming at some point soon. And finally on the project is one that is kind of a finished project, but I'm going to make a modification to it, which I'm going to show you. Now this is a framework bralette knitted from yarn that I dyed in the previous episode. I casted it on pretty much immediately after dyeing the yarn. It's these nice sort of sludgy autumnal colours. And modifications I've made. I followed the pattern pretty much exactly, but I held the yarn double. It was a fingering weight. And instead of starting at the bottom of the ribbing and just working all the way up, I wanted it to be so that I would use every last bit of yarn. So I did a provisional cast on, did one round of ribbing, did the rest of the pattern, then picked up from the provisional cast on and just used the rest of the yarn for the ribbing, which I think is a really nice way to use up all the yarn, because for my size it uses up 100 gram skein just about perfectly, which is great for me. So I will probably make more of these, just because I think they're a really nice thing to wear for layering and stuff, and they're great for me. Again, I realise that it's not going to apply for everyone, but as a single skein project for some of the stash yarns that I've got that I otherwise might not know what to do with. Problem with this is that my ratios mean that this on its own does not provide me with sufficient support. I don't want to have to wear them with a bra underneath. I want to wear it as actual underwear. And so I'm going to do what I did with my first framework bralette, which is to create an elastic casing and put in some wide elastic under the ribbing so that it provides some really good support. So I've got some fairly strong elastic here. It's a nice width. That'll make sure that it doesn't sort of twist or flip up or anything, and it stays nice and flat. What I did previously is to just, I had longer ribbing on the previous one, and so I could just fold the ribbing double, stitch it down, and use that as the elastic casing. I don't have enough length here to do that. So what I've got is some fabric that I have chopped from when I used to buy fast fashion things many, many years ago. I still have a lot of clothes that are no longer fit for purpose because they were just quite poor quality and the stitching has come undone and they're not really good garments anymore, and so I tend to cut them up and repurpose them for other things. So I have cut a strip of this fabric, which I'm going to stitch down to create an elastic casing, and it's a fairly flimsy cotton jersey, which will be perfect in this case because it'll be sort of soft against the skin, it won't rub or anything, and it'll just hold that elastic in place. So I'm just quickly going to show you how I'm going to do that, in case it's something that you might want to consider if you want to knit this pattern or a similar one. I know that it's been quite trendy recently, and while I usually don't really go for trendy patterns, it's a really good one. and I think that it's not a problem, but something that quite a few people have encountered where they would like to have it provide more support than it does. So yeah, I'll show you how I do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn this inside out. So we're working on the inside, the wrong side of the garment. I've got my needle threaded here with a thread that doesn't quite match, but is close enough. And I'm going to start at the side here. Now, because this fabric is just one I have sliced from an existing garment, I've just taken as much width as I can. So we've got a slanted edge there. I'm just going to kind of ignore it and start working from where it's straight. You can see the edges are not perfect. I'm going to be tucking those underneath. And it's just a bit wider than the elastic that I'm using. And so just going to fold where I'm starting under. I'm doing this by hand because I don't want the stitching to show from the wrong side, and also sewing machines don't tend to handle hand knits very well, and especially for something like this that would require top stitching, it would distort the fabric quite a lot and be less than ideal. So as I go, I'm just going to make sure that we're not getting any excess fabric bunched up here, and I'm just going to keep an eye on the edge to make sure I'm not tucking too much under. And I'm just going to do a little whip stitch, and as I go, I'm going to keep both the knit and the fabric stretched out so that both the fabric and the knitted item have a fair bit of stretch in them, whereas the thread I'm using doesn't. So by stitching onto stretched out fabric, when it stretches when I'm taking the garment off and on, it won't snap the thread. And so I'm just catching the very edge of the fold there. And I'm going to try and keep this around the same distance from where the ribbing starts. And I'm just going to keep stitching like this, and I'll go all the way round, and then I'll do the bottom as well and leave a gap at the ends so that we can get the elastic in, and at that stage I will come back to you and show you how it's going. Right, so I've now stitched this down all the way around, so that's sitting fairly smooth on there. It's got a decent amount of stretch to it still, so I don't need to worry about the stitches constricting the stretch of it. I've cut down my elastic to be the correct size for my rib circumference. I've chopped off the little end bits of fabric from here. I've left a little bit of overlap so that we'll be able to stitch that down once the elastic is in. And casing is just a tiny bit wider than the elastic, and I'm going to put a safety pin through there and awkwardly try to pull this through. It's always a bit more uncomfortable with a wide piece of elastic because the corners play up. But actually this is going fairly easily. And the interesting thing about this, with this pattern where you've got the ribbing pulling in the bottom of it, when you put in the elastic, for me at least, the circumference of the elastic is wider than the unstretched ribbing. So it means that the elastic, once it's in, ends up pulling out the bottom of the bralette, which feels counterintuitive because you'd expect the elastic to pull it in more, but because there's quite a lot of negative ease recommended in the design, and obviously to keep everything in place and well fitting. Now, that's all the way through. That went surprisingly nicely. And I'm just going to try and pull the rest of the elastic through a bit more. In fact, I'm going to pin that onto there so it doesn't escape back through the casing. And it's the sort of thing where the elastic won't be exactly evenly distributed after I've done this, but as it's worn, it'll balance out a bit. I'll keep doing this and I'll come back to you once I've got it all through. Okay, so that's pretty much there. When measuring out my elastic, I made sure to leave a little tiny bit for overlap, just so that I can stitch the two ends together. I'm going to use my thread doubled for this. And when stitching elastic, I usually just do a little square of stitching. I generally don't worry about making it pretty because it's going to be on the inside of the casing. I just want to make sure it is strong and functional. Right, that's that there. Now, more squishing to try and get this to sit inside. Now that they're sewn together, I can just push them on in. And eventually that will even itself out. There we go. So much wrangling. And then I'm just going to stitch this bit closed once I've got it to sit flat, and then I'll come back to you and show you how it's looking. So here we are, finally. After a fair bit of hand stitching and wrangling and wiggling, got a nice elastic casing on there. And I think you can see there what I mean about the elastic holding the bottom of the ribbing outwards. So it is weird because it looks wider at the point where it needs to be narrowest. However, it does work, and the rest stretches out quite a lot. And I've tried it on and it's going to function nicely. So hopefully that is a nice little option for if it's a pattern that you've been keen on but would like it to provide a bit more support. Yeah, so with that, I'm gonna quickly show you some things that are growing in my garden And when I come back, I will show you some things that I have dyed with things that are growing in my garden. There is no doubt that at the moment the wallflowers are by far the best thing in the garden. This is a variety called Vulcan that we grew from seed starting in the summer of 2019. So they've been a long while coming, but have been well worth it. We've also got the tulips and daffodils going. The daffodils have been quite spread out, and we've got quite a few different varieties of tulips, including some nice coppery orangey yellowy ones called brownie. I really love the way they glow in the sunlight, and they're just a little bit extra. This ornamental quince is one that we grew from seed. We planted it quite a few years ago, and I'm so pleased it's flowering now. The kale is just going over, but we've been harvesting some of the flower buds to eat, sort of like purple sprouting broccoli, and that's been really tasty. And the rest we're letting go to seed because I find the flowers really pretty. Also growing, we've got some broad beans on the way. We're trying to get some succession going so that we have some that are already in flower and hopefully will be producing beans soon. And then we'll have more later on. This is the garlic we planted last autumn. They're going strong. And just over there, this is the woad patch. I harvested most of the woad a couple of weeks ago and have had a bit of a play with that, and I'll show you that shortly. That little trip around the garden. I'm really excited to see what it does this year. It feels like I've not been gardening for a very long time, and so each year and season feels completely different, and it's really fun to see it grow. And I said I was going to show you some things that I had dyed with things from the garden. And last year I had intended to do a woad vat. You saw I had a lot of woad growing in the garden. And I ended up not doing a vat just because last year was quite overwhelming and I didn't find the time for it. And so it meant that I had a lot of woad that had overwintered, so it's in its second year, which is generally considered to be not a great time for harvesting woad for blue. And so I didn't want to try and make a vat from it then because it's a lot of time and effort and sort of investment, and I didn't want to do that knowing that it might just not pan out. So I decided to do a salt extraction on some linen that I have dyed lots of times previously with various plants. So it started off a sort of dull beige, as you would kind of expect from a lot of plants that give colour but not interesting colour. And I decided to overdye it with the woad, just sprinkling on some salt and smushing it all together, as I have done in a video last year, and I also did a quick reel on my Instagram if you want to go over and see what that process looks like. And this is the fabric that I got. It is a very pale sort of pistachio green. You can see it's very crispy. Just because it's linen that's dried outside and I haven't scrunched it up much yet. But I intend to sew something with it. It's not dyed completely evenly from the various dye batches I've done in the past. So there are some areas where, having said that, I can't find any. There are some areas where the colour isn't even, and so I'll see how that works out for dyeing. Yeah, there's some marks on some areas, but I think I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to make a dress or a pair of comfy trousers with these, but I am sort of thinking about it. I tend to spend quite a lot of time thinking about sewing projects without actually making any steps towards starting them and then go for it and do them very quickly because I've had so much time to think about it. But so I was very excited about the fact that even though it's very pale, which is kind of what you expect from a salt extraction, it is an actual colour and one that I really like. So that was very pleasing. Even though it was from a lot of woad, and that meant that I did what I tend to do, which is that woad, even after you've used the salt extraction method, so you've got this pan of planty goop that really stinks, you can put that in a pot on the hob, as you would do with most natural dye plants. Put them in some water, simmer them, and then often you'll get some colour from that. And I found that woad doing that gives shades from like peachy pinks to warm yellows, kind of the spectrum of custard powder, if you're familiar with that, like pinky, yellowy, peachy, egg yolky colour. And so, you know, it's generally a fairly nice colour. It can vary depending on the time of year and what you use to modify it. I decided to chuck all of it in the pan with a fairly small amount of fleece and got this colour, which I was completely amazed by. It's, in areas, it's a sort of almost apricot-y, corally pink. And then in other areas, it's a sort of yellowy orange, and it's just completely amazing. I absolutely love it, and I'm very excited about it. I'm just amazed to have got this strong a colour from it, especially when, you know, it's not an optimal time of year. I hadn't actually weighed the woad before starting the salt extraction, but I'd say that this was from, you talk about the weight of dye stuff relative to the weight of fibre. Often I'll go for a 1-to-1 ratio, so you use the same amount of dye stuff as fibre that you're dyeing. This was way out of balance, so way more woad than fleece. But for that colour, totally worth it. I love it. I'm very excited about it. And then because there seemed to be quite a lot of colour still in the dye pot, I put in some mohair that I had already dyed previously with, again, something that gave quite a drab colour, probably an exhaust of something previously. And it's given quite a nice sort of warm, browny, peachy colour. It's not nearly as vibrant or exciting as the other colour, but it's still completely pleasant. And so I think I might end up blending these two together, possibly along with something else, and see how that goes. And at some point this year, I will do some spinning with it. I am intending to do a lot of spinning projects and have just been knitting so much recently that I've not done that much spinning at all, but I'm looking forward to getting back to it. And with that, I think that's all I've got for you this month. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing in between episodes, you can follow me on Instagram. I tend to post fairly regularly, lots of updates about what I'm working on, what I'm releasing, what things I've got coming up soon. A more reliable but less frequent way of keeping up with me is my newsletter on my website, which is a way of guaranteeing that you'll hear about new product releases and things like that. And if you want to help support the work I'm doing with local fibres and all of that, you can join me over on Patreon, where I post bonus videos every month, and we've also got a really nice little group. We get together once a month on Zoom and chat about what we're making and help each other out with ideas and things. And so I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye bye.